Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hebba Youssef.
The only way that we can really kind of actually get to a place where HR is not that perpetual punching bag is that you actually empower people to have real and transparent conversations because the organization can handle it. Not to make everything about emotional intelligence, but that is like, if you have one skill in your entire life, this is the one. Know how to hear and understand someone else, know how to be there for another person. Because if employees find that they can talk to each other and find that community, find that alignment, and then bring a meaningful thought or a meaningful complaint or a meaningful idea to the people who have the authority to make that idea come to life, that's where you get really interesting stuff.
We're here with a special edition of the I Hate It Here podcast. If you have been online in the last few days, you might have seen my face on a New York Times article under the word miserable. And I even put on my special I Hate It Here hat for today's episode because we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the commentary online that we have seen with the release of this New York Times article about why everyone in HR is so miserable. And joining me today is my friend, Rebecca. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this. I'm the Chief Customer Officer and co-founder at SkillCycle. My background's actually in HR. So I spent like 10, 12 years in the HR space and worked a lot in talent acquisition, learning and development. I was a head of people and culture. And it was around, I think, 7 or 8 years ago now that I quit my HR job to co-found SkillCycle. And a lot of it was fueled by a lot of things that I sort of saw in the article. So I'm very excited to kind of talk about like the reaction that we're seeing here, how people can sort of channel this energy into other things, but really kind of do a deep dive in what's getting everybody so reactive to this.
Yeah. Okay. So the article was titled, "So Human Resources is Making You Miserable," which I thought was a very interesting title. I mean, as somebody who writes subject lines for a newsletter that I want people to read, there is an art to getting people to click things. And boy, oh boy, did this headline get a lot of people to click it. And much to my surprise, when I logged on to LinkedIn, I mean, like I knew this article was going to be out there, right? I'd been contributing and talking to this journalist for months about the article. I'd been giving my feedback and direction on where I think it should go. Ultimately, he wrote the article he chose to write. None of my business. I have some lovely quotes in there if you want to read it. There's a picture of this hat too. But my surprise was when I logged in and I saw the commentary. And it's weird because people were posting the article and my picture is the first one. So when they post it, it's my face under the words miserable. And I was like, hey, I have some bad days. I have some good days. I think a lot of people who would meet me would say, she's a pretty happy person. So it was like kind of shocking to see that. And then I was like a bit uneasy about the commentary that was coming from other HR leaders. So what was your immediate reaction when you were reading it?
It was funny because I think I texted you as soon as I saw it. I think I was just like, hey, cool article, cool to see you here. And it was almost like, I think my first reaction was in the actual content itself, there was a lot of truth to it in the sense that I talk to HR people all day, every day. I was an HR person. I still sort of identify as an HR person. And there's a lot that can be very challenging to work in that field, right? Like it's very emotionally invested. There's a lot of work that you do to kind of make sure that you're supporting people in the way that you need to. And so when I first saw this article, I was like, cool, this is cool that we're opening up this conversation in such a public place. Like who else works in a field that the New York Times is writing about? It's like, I don't know if it's so far as to call it pop culture, but it's kind of like HR's pop culture moment. And it was kind of like, I think it was interesting. And then you said that you were getting some interesting comments from it. So I was like, well, let me see what you're talking about. So I don't know. I mean, I can go into sort of my initial reactions when I started to see people's reactions, but
yeah, well, don't worry, because I'm going to read you some of the reactions that people had. We're getting spicy today. But what was your initial reaction when you started reading the comment?
My initial reactions were, I thought it was interesting that the first response or a lot of the responses were to invalidate the feelings and the emotions of the people in the article by saying like, this isn't how this goes. This is not what the experience is. This isn't what everyone else that I've talked to has experienced. So therefore, what these people are saying can't be real. And I had this moment where I was like, it's not, if I fall down and I hurt my arm and you're standing next to me and you didn't fall, you're not going to be like, your arm doesn't hurt because mine doesn't. But that was sort of that initial reaction. And then when I really thought about it, I thought deeper and I was like, these are sort of people who work in the HR field who you would think are kind of there to listen to employees who are a lot of our job in HR is to kind of drive that understanding, to really hear what employees need, balance that with the needs of the business, and to sort of see this initial kind of defensiveness and invalidation of someone being vulnerable and open in a very public way was, I think, disheartening was kind of the first word. And then it went right into frustrating. And that's when I texted you.
The text where people were like, oh my God, is this you? So many people were texting me that day. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't need this today. Like I forgot it was coming out. But it was like, I was shocked. And very few things shock me anymore because, when you do this job long enough, nothing really shocks you. Yeah. But I was like, we're supposed to be the people that have empathy for the employees. And we don't even take a pause to have empathy for one another. Mm-hmm. And I'm not foolish enough to think we're all having, like, I would never throw a blanket statement out there like we're all miserable. I would never say something like that. But I do think there are a lot of people that are really struggling in this job. And when they go to those comments and they see it, they're suddenly feeling very isolated and very alone because a very loud minority of people felt confident enough and felt the courage to tell them, that's not what I'm feeling. So you're probably not feeling that. And that really shook me.
And I try to do this exercise to sort of assume best intention, just Always. To kind of, let's like reframe this, like assume best intention. Maybe the best intention is to sort of flip the script to say, if you're feeling frustrated, here are things that you can do. Here are ways that you can put yourself in a different mindset. It was more in that kind of language or thought process. I might not have had as much of a surprised reaction to it, but it wasn't. It was like, no, you don't feel this way. And again, I just kept going to like, do you say this to your employees and then wonder why you don't know what the real challenges are that people are facing? Do you also think that people aren't honest in employee engagement surveys? Well, maybe it's because there's some invalidation happening in a very public way too, by the way. And I don't know, I felt very confused and I felt very disappointed, especially because when you look at kind of, I feel like there's a bunch of different types of HR right now because HR is kind of going through like this sea change. And I happen to be in a lot of these sort of progressive communities and progressive groups where it is people that are kind of saying the thing that they were afraid to say, seeking community, seeking conversation. And the resounding kind of thing that we do see is that there is a lot of frustration. But what's empowering is that you see people sort of talking their way through it, but you can't do that until you acknowledge that those feelings are real. And then there's sort of this other group of HR that's kind of like, keep pretending that things are a certain way. Like perform this job, perform this persona, perform this philosophy, even if you don't really believe it yourself because you're afraid to acknowledge difficulty or hard feelings. And it just kind of got me thinking, like, where are we headed? Like, where are we headed and what are we going to do with this? Because I think it's really important for us to kind of come together on that.
I did not think people sharing their feelings about a job could be so divisive. The comments were just so, it was really, again, I'm not trying to keep saying it was hard, but it was like really hard because I was like, listen, there's also beauty in frustration because a lot of times the people who are frustrated are probably going to try to make something change. And I think like I look at all the times I've been frustrated in my career and I think about what does that frustration mean? Why does it show up this way? I've done like a lot of thought practices around my anger as a person and like why are the things that make me feel angry? Why do they show up and how does that happen at work? And I think like a lot of it ends up motivating me to change something. And that is literally why I wrote I Hate It Here. And I remember my CEO asking me, why would you want to call it that? And I said, it is a feeling a lot of HR people have. But because we're so public facing in the company, we're not allowed to express it. And what if we created a safe space for people to feel the way they want to feel and acknowledge those feelings, take hold of them, and then actually make change from the things that frustrate them? That's the part that excites me.
And I think that was the part so I tell people about your newsletter all the time. And when I first found it, I saw the title, I Hate It Here, and I was just like, yeah. And, I was actually talking to someone yesterday who, we've been connected for about a year or so now. We catch up every once in a while. And so I was asking her, I was like, how's work? How's things? And she goes, oh, I hate it here, just without even missing a beat. And,
I love it.
There's all these reasons why, but it was just like literally without missing a beat. And I'm like, okay, that's totally fair, totally valid. And she works for a different organization that has its own sort of challenges, but then we instantly segued into like, how can I relieve your burden? How can I make you hate it here less? And it's funny because sometimes when I agree with you that frustration can really kind of generate really good things, like sometimes when we're too comfortable or if the current status quo benefits us a lot, we're not trying to think too much about how to change it. But it's when you are really frustrated that you can be honest with the problems. Because what do they say? Like the first step is admitting that you have a problem. It's okay to have problems. Like we're all paid to fix problems. That's basically what a job is. So pretending that that problem doesn't exist doesn't really serve anybody. And it makes you less able to contribute to the solution. So I think what HR can be really good at is finding the problems, building enough trust to get to the bottom of what needs to be solved, and then problem solving to kind of get there. But by just completely not engaging in the conversation about the problem, it's like you're like, no. It's like you're just suppressing the emotions, suppressing the feelings, and missing a big opportunity to make it right, I guess.
Our experiences at work vary so differently based on our lived experience in the world. And so potentially some of the people who are saying they have not acknowledged frustrations, potentially they exist in a system where they're given the privilege to not have frustrations, or they're treated fairly without having to advocate for that, or they're given authority in a room simply because they exist. And I think that's the other part of that made it really hard, was like, you're telling me you've had no frustrations, but you're not me. And so many beautiful things are born from frustrations, like you were saying. So I think like even that lens of it, I went way too deep. Like I went way meta so fast because I was like, oh, these people they've either never worked at a startup, they've never worked for a bad founder. And then I start to ask myself like, or maybe they have privilege and have been given authority and autonomy, and their ride in HR hasn't been frustrating because they haven't had to advocate for the respect and authority that they deserve. That was like a segue I went on where I was like, and then I started spiraling. Okay, but real quick, in a fun segment I want to call I Asked ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, what inventions were born from frustrations? And I just feel like I have to share some of these because I'm like fascinated by this. Okay, ready? Yeah. And obviously I asked ChatGPT, let's be very clear. We all know ChatGPT isn't 100% clear. It can make mistakes. So please take this with a grain of salt. If I'm wrong, I would love for you to DM me and tell me ChatGPT was wrong about inventions born from frustrations. But the first one was the Post-it note. Apparently, Spencer Silver, a scientist at 3M, was frustrated by his failed attempts to create a super strong adhesive. So instead, he created a low-tech reusable adhesive. And that was actually used later by his colleague to create sticky notes for marking pages in his hymn book, which led to the invention of Post-it notes.
Which is like such a ubiquitous thing too. Who hasn't had an experience with a Post-it note?
I mean, Carrie Bradshaw's broken up with on one, so
right.
I'm sorry, don't hate me. Like if we're gonna quote things,
that's such a universal thing.
That's just a Post-it note reference in my head. I'm like, I can never not think of how she was broken up with on a Post-it note. Okay, another one, which I thought was really interesting, the windshield wiper. Mary Anderson invented the windshield wiper after observing drivers having to open their windows, stick their heads out to see during a rainstorm. Her frustration with the lack of visibility in bad weather led her to design the first manual windshield wiper.
Oh. And you know what's funny? It's like it's something that you just take for granted. Like, it's like I couldn't imagine not having windshield wipers. It's just like you would think, oh, yeah, they've always been around because that's how embedded they are in how we function in our modern day society. Is like, how could you even not think about those existing? But she invented it because she was frustrated or she saw frustration.
She saw frustration. Okay, last one. I'll only do 3. I mean, I can ask ChatGPT for more, but these are the 3 that I thought were most interesting. The safety pin. Walter Hunt invented the safety pin as a solution to his frustration with pins used at the time, which were difficult to use and prone to coming undone. His invention offered a simple and safe way to fasten things together. A safety pin.
Interesting.
Good luck.
That's so cool. See, I think that that's really cool because I like it when people take it upon themselves to solve a problem too that they're frustrated by. Because there's also you can sort of sit there and just vent and let someone else solve it. But eventually, I don't know, eventually someone has to sort of step up, right? And I always think it's kind of like interesting, the stories of like inventors, like anyone who invented like huge things like the pacemaker or the safety pin. It's like all it took was that person to sort of say, you know what, I'm frustrated by this problem and I'm going to take ownership in fixing it, or at least play a part in it instead of just like letting someone else fix it and complain about it.
Which is why seeing people be like, I don't have those frustrations. My first thought was, what are you doing day to day then? If you're in HR and you're not frustrated, what are you fixing? Are you just like running performance management to run performance management? Lord knows I don't think I've ever encountered a problem that has not at first frustrated me. And that is why I've tried to solve it.
And it's funny because it's almost like in those cases, it's like if you are doing that, then that's where the discredit from the profession kind of comes from, because HR is frustrated, but people are also frustrated with HR. And HR has been a punchline. I mean, watch The Office, like Toby, he was a punchline. Literally everybody hated him. And that's kind of the thing that, we could either be the Toby who's just trying his best, but no one is taken seriously, or like we can really kind of drive a lot of, I don't know, respect to the profession if we actually solve problems or help employees in the way that it makes them feel, or that it makes them feel seen, and it makes their experience at the organization more successful, because then that's going to make our experience as companies employing them better, right?
Yeah. And then I was thinking about the fact that like on LinkedIn, there was this study that people, what job function was like changing jobs the most, and it was HR. And I was like, come on, let's like think about that. Like if so many people are changing jobs in HR because it's not going great, like maybe there's something to say to the 3 people who are in the article that are saying, yeah, this job can be miserable. And I even said on LinkedIn, like, until the miserable days outweigh the good days, I will keep doing this work. But it is so unrealistic to think that there isn't something really hard about this job. And I think the other piece of it is, I don't think a lot of people really understand the extent and the scope of this job and the emotional labor of this job too. And like, listen, there are bad HR teams out there. Every time I see someone on Twitter that's like, HR is not your friend, I got fired for going to them, I'm like, bad HR team. That's right. A bad team. We want there to be more good teams than bad teams someday. So I empathize with the employees who hate HR. And if HR has treated you badly and you're listening to this, I will just apologize on behalf of them, because I have been also treated badly by HR and I'm in HR. So there's like something to be said there. But I think the being miserable and people being like, you should be happy, I'm like, get out of here. Get out of here so fast. Okay, hold on. I want to read you, and in the next segment called I'm going to read you comments. I don't know why I'm on like a segment kick today. I want to read you some comments that were made on some popular posts, and then I want us to like talk a little bit about why people were making these comments and like what the top post was. So I think some comments that people have made. Someone said the issues in HR are systemic and have yet to materially change. HR thought leaders are very much disconnected from the front lines of HR where culture is created. Additionally, HR has a very real diversity issue in which the same voices from the same people get elevated despite not contributing anything new or innovative to the industry. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, there are a lot of systemic challenges within HR and because there are a lot of systemic challenges within our society and within our organization. It's not just with one department or with one group of people. It's everywhere. And someone who sort of thinks that it's only existing within one team or one department is kind of missing the bigger picture of the entire thing. It is unfortunate that more voices are louder than others. And it is honestly, it's my biggest fear as a founder who doesn't work in HR is to be that thought leader that's saying things that are sort of out of touch. And It's why being very closely tied to customers and also working at a company where we have employees is a good sort of way to sort of keep the pulse of what's actually going on in organizations. You know what it is? It's almost like it's disappointing that there's this conversation about systemic challenges and making it seem like it's just on HR at the same time that certain organizations are completely eliminating programs that actually support diversity, equity, and inclusion, which could actually change that everywhere, not just in HR.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if there's a strategy for that, but I don't know.
The problems and situations you encounter at work mirror the things that are happening in the real world. You can't create this like magical environment at work that isn't impacted by things happening in the real world. And things in the real world like systemic racism exist. And when they exist in the real world and there's a system of unfairness, eventually that will manifest in your workplace. Despite all of us trying, despite all the work that is done by so many thoughtful DEI leaders, it still happens in the workplace. And so I think this part about thinking systemically about the systemic issues that we are having, I also think it means thinking about the world outside and how the world outside is mirrored in your organization and what you can do in your organization to provide the most equitable experience.
It can be tough, I think, for leaders to understand that because there's sort of this tendency to want to compartmentalize, to sort of say, well, the outside world is the outside world. The work, our work is here. These things aren't necessarily related to each other. And if that's the way that it is for you, then good for you. That's great that you can compartmentalize that way if that's what you need to get through your day to day. But that's not how it is for everybody, especially for the people who are the most affected. It's like when you're really affected by things going on in the world, whether it's an election or whether it's in just global political events that are unprecedented times, right? If you are affected by those, which most people are in some way, you don't get to turn that off just to do your job. And if you do, then you also need a place to balance that out and a place that sort of at least sees and acknowledges that these things are happening or you're going to burn out. You know what burnout is? It's when you put on too much of an act for too long and you become exhausted by living your life as someone who you're not. That's a huge cause of burnout. And compartmentalizing in that way can actually fuel a lot of that. And a lot of the frustrations that you see from employees with HR is actually rooted in the frustrations in these responses to these, to this article. Most people are frustrated because they don't feel heard. They don't feel heard and they don't feel seen and they don't feel acknowledged. So it's like, why are we working so hard to keep doing that? I think it's because it's harder for us to open up to someone else's perspective and to do that emotional work to understand each other better, to help each other feel heard and then do something with that.
It's very real. Also, Rebecca had not read these comments before I read them to her. So she's like live reacting right now, y'all. So let's like give it up to you for me reading her comments to you. Okay, hold on. I'm going to try to find some more. Let's see. Someone said, while HR does come up with its fair share of challenges, the idea that everyone is fed up with HR doesn't align with my experience either. In fact, I found that many HR professionals are deeply committed to making a positive impact in their organizations, even amidst the difficulties. It's a demanding role, but it's also one of the most fulfilling when you can see how you can influence the culture and well-being of an entire company. The narrative that everyone hates HR seems like a skewed portrayal. There's a lot more respect and appreciation out there than this article suggests.
Okay.
Right.
What I don't get is what I get is why it has to be an either or. Like, why can't it be a both and? If that's not your experience, that's great. Like, congratulations. If that's not your experience today, maybe it will be your experience in a year, or maybe it has been before and you've moved past that and now it no longer is because you've established more credibility, more authority, more autonomy to have a little bit more say and control over how your job is done and who you work with. But it's true that it's not everybody's experience. That is true. And I think that we can all agree and understand that hyperbole and ways of expressing things, we don't actually mean everyone hates HR. Come on, use some context clues. Yeah. It just feels like it's nitpicking on one word just specifically to undermine what someone is saying and therefore completely missing the point of what they were actually trying to express. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, sure, not everyone hates HR, not everyone in HR is miserable, but that doesn't devalue and invalidate the people who are. And sometimes that's how you want to express it. Like there's ways that we express ourselves as people, and then there's ways that we respond to those things too. Like, I don't know, good for you and good for them.
I'm glad that they have that, and I think like it's really funny because I talk to my friends about this quite a bit, and I'm like, hey, do you hate HR? Like I'll ask my friends, like, do you hate your HR people? And a lot of them are like, yeah, they suck. That's, I would say like 95% of the responses I get from my friends are like, yeah, I would never go to HR for that. They're awful. And that makes me so sad because this job, like she said, is super fulfilling. When we're able to do it right, I feel so full of joy.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's like 5 or maybe 10 or maybe 20 people out there who hated when I was their HR leader. Like that's probably true for certain reasons beyond my control. But I also think the interesting thing is like we start in the negative a lot because of the pop culture portrayal. I'm actually doing a fun podcast episode, spoiler alert, recording it tomorrow, about HR and pop culture and how that has like changed our perception and how we have shown up in pop culture. It's going to be really fun. I'm excited. Yeah, I'm just having like a lot of fun this season, as you can tell.
I mean, it's
not miserable at all. Not miserable at all, to be very clear. Very happy. But
well, you're using it to create content, right? Like you're using it to bring more words out there. You're putting your energy into something productive. Isn't that the point?
Trying to make it, yeah, that's the whole thing. Okay, but one last thing, I want to go back to this, and this is how like my ADHD brain works. Sometimes there's this interesting thing, bear with me, this is going to be like very meta, and I'm going to explain it to you. Actually, I don't think this is very meta. I don't know why I'm saying that, but I'm going to explain this to you, and I'm going to explain my thought, and I'm going to hear what you think. 70%, I think the last stat I was like 70% of HR is women, right? I think right. That's the stat. The stat feels about right.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And I think we have demonized anger and frustration for so long. And we've especially demonized it, I think, for women to feel that way. I feel like we have been told that we need to show up and be polite and be kind and be courteous and not raise our voices and be ladies. And I think somewhere along the line, anger got a bad rep. And I think anger is one of the most beautiful fucking feelings on this world because it reminds me that I'm alive and I exist and there's something to be done. Because if I'm angry about something, it probably is either conflicting with my core values, it's not aligning with my lived experience, it's not aligning with my perspective, and then that kind of fuels me to want to change something. But I feel like having 70% of HR be women and frustration and anger being something that's not celebrated often in our culture, I think has made a lot of people conditioned to say, oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. I'm not angry. I'm fine. I'm not frustrated. I'm fine. I'm not miserable. And I think the thing about me is, yeah, I'm fucking miserable sometimes. And I think there's power to saying how we are feeling. And I'm not going to let people tell me because of my gender maybe or how I identify that I'm not allowed to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
That was my thought. That was my grand thought. It's probably not that revolutionary. Someone listening is like, yeah, Hebba, shut up. Like,
no, I think it's validating. If anything, it's like, even if they're like, yeah, that's 100% where I would think that too. Like, I do agree that anger is one of those feelings that's just like, it can be really invigorating because it means that you care about something. And it means that you could be willing to stand for something, or you can just feel anger and just bury it or ignore it and let it bubble up somewhere else and channel it elsewhere. There is this pressure in HR to be on board with the company and to, reinforce and communicate the company strategy, the company vision, even if you're privileged to have the seat at the table when these decisions are being made, you can voice your own opinion, you can voice your dissent, right? But sometimes you have to disagree and move forward. And sometimes you do have to reinforce policies you don't really agree with or things that you don't love, but that's the job. The job is that no one person runs a company. HR doesn't make decisions about everything, and it doesn't make decisions about things in silos, right? So there is a lot of pressure to sort of show up as the champion of the strategy, even if you disagree with it. And you're the front line for people's complaints. Mostly because, like, if you're lucky, you're the front line for people's complaints, right? If you're unlucky, then they're complaining to each other and you never get to actually get the feedback.
Yeah.
But, if you have the chance to hear people out and to reinforce what they're thinking, it's really powerful. But if you pretend that the way that they feel isn't real, then you're going to lose them. That's where they get frustrated with you. And it's okay. And I sometimes struggle with this too, to kind of find that balance of like, well, how do I get behind something that maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't fully disagree with either? And you do almost have to shut a piece of your brain off just to do the job that way. But the beauty of it is like, you have to be able to balance both. You have to be able to balance the needs and the strategy of the organization with the needs of the employees and find sort of that best way forward. And like, I'll say the thing that I've always thought, I think HR is always going to be the punching bag because you're the safest bet. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to get mad at my mom. I'm going to yell at my mom, even if I'm actually mad at someone else, because like, I can get mad at my mom. Like, she's my mom. It's fine. And, you know, it's almost like I think HR is always going to kind of be that punching bag, but that's why it's important to acknowledge, like, when that's hard, when it's hard to just keep taking that. And because you can be so isolated in a company, if you don't have anywhere to go to talk about that and to process that and to work through that with peers who can relate to and understand, you're going to either become so detached that you don't even know yourself anymore, or you're going to lash out and you're going to be that vengeful HR person that's like, I'm going to spite you. I mean, I don't think we have too many of those now, but they exist because people like that exist. So they exist in every job and every profession, you know?
Yeah, I'm always like, who hurt you?
Yeah, hurt people.
Yeah, especially hurt HR teams when we're the punching bag all the time. What do you think it would take for us not to be the punching bag? Like, nobody rags on finance the way they rag on HR on Twitter. No one rags on product the way that they rag like on product on Twitter. I'm like, is this it? Like, are we just destined to be the butt of every joke?
I don't think any department should be a punching bag. Because I think that like there's a difference between a department and a person, right?
Mm.
The only way that we can really kind of actually get to a place where HR is not that perpetual punching bag is that you actually empower people to have real and transparent conversations because the organization can handle it. I mean, not to make everything about emotional intelligence, but that is like, if you have one skill in your entire life, this is the one. EQ, emotional intelligence, know how to hear and understand someone else, know how to be there for another person. Because if employees find that they can talk to each other and find that community, find that alignment, and then bring a meaningful thought or a meaningful complaint or a meaningful idea to the people who have the authority to make that idea come to life, that's where you get really interesting stuff. And you know, the way you don't become the punching bag is you also upskill your managers and your executives and your leaders so that employees have other people to go to. So it's not like, oh, they're going to product to complain. It's that they're going to their chief product officer because that is a human person who that just happens to be their job. But they're equipped to handle emotions. They're equipped to handle employee conversations or things that employees need to say. It's like when HR isn't the only person with EQ in a company, you're going to see that people can actually have more meaningful conversations together and do something about it.
I love that. I don't want down with being HR's punching bag.
Yeah.
I don't want to be it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I have some more comments to read to you. So I'm going to keep going.
Let's do it.
I'm having so much fun. Oh, this one I don't love. What a bunch of whiners. Every leadership job worth doing is hard and sometimes thankless work. The best HR leaders I know and work with don't whine. They do great work. Just like the best CEOs and other C-suite leaders I know work with. They don't whine either. Let's step up our game and get back to being great HR business leaders and leave the complaining to someone else. I don't think that even needs a response, honestly.
I just want to be like, maybe they don't whine to you because you've made it clear that it's not a safe place to whine to. But
yeah, that right there. The other thing that just clicked in my brain. I'm firing off cylinders today. Like, what was in my coffee this morning? I'm really into it. Okay. The thing that clicked in my head is that, to me, that comment represents somebody who I feel like would tell their HR team, like, feelings. We don't need to talk about our feelings, or you don't need to be vulnerable. I really think that in the last 10 years, when we have started talking about leadership, we talk about people being vulnerable as leaders. And I don't think me airing my frustrations is complaining. If I'm just showing up every day and I'm yapping and complaining about the same damn thing and I'm doing nothing about it, sure, call me a whiner. But if I'm expressing that I am feeling strongly about something that I don't like, I don't understand why that, again, gets such a negative rep. But that comment just reminds me of somebody who would say, like, who doesn't believe that leaders need to be vulnerable. And I think the greatest lesson we've learned is when leaders are vulnerable, they create more psychologically safe environments for their team and their employees and their coworkers and their peers to also say, hey, I'm experiencing something terrible too.
It sounds very out of touch. You know, when you look at the workforce today and you look at the up and coming workforce and where we're headed as a society, as we hire more Gen Z, as we millennials age, right? And as we become managers and move higher up in organizations, you know, millennials were always made fun of for having, you know, all these expectations and feeling so entitled about, you know, getting paid for the work that they do. And there's just this new expectation between where people are kind of up and coming in the workforce compared to what it had always been. And I think that there are some people that are having a hard time acknowledging that and processing that and knowing how to handle that and how to show up as that vulnerable leader. If we are expected to basically work 24/7, even if we don't actually, right? But most of us, like, we're available on our phones, or we can access email on our phone, or there's just so many different ways. It's harder to turn off work now than it ever has before. So then that means it's harder for us to turn off life when we're at work too. And that means that sometimes you're going to have something that you need to whine about or complain about because you need to express it and then see if you can do something about it. But I don't know, it just feels very out of touch to say, no one's whining, don't talk about it, just do your job, which is kind of the vibe that I got from that comment.
It's so disconnected. It's like my favorite when they show, like, I just relived the story the other day. I'm sorry, this made me laugh because I relived it up with my friend the other day. It was such a fascinating experience. She and I were on this HR team. It was a really tough time. I don't want to give specifics because, like, I don't want to get into it. It was a really tough time. We worked really, 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 really hard. And at the end of the year, like, it was a year in which HR was asked to do more than ever before. That's all I'm going to say. And at the end of the year, the company was like, we had record-breaking profits this year. We did so great. And to show our appreciation, we're giving all of you a $1,000 bonus. And that was like, that's a lot of money. But I got the message and I was like, you might as well just have punched me in the face, honestly, because I literally went above and beyond this year. It was an unprecedented time for HR. And you're just saying, here's some money and a bonus. See ya. And I think, like, I was reliving that with my friend recently because we were both talking about it. And I was like, wow, I, like, really did not respond well to them just giving us a blanket bonus to everybody, despite it being a year in which HR took on more than ever before and faced some times that were the very first unprecedented times. And it was really rough for a lot of people. And I just felt like the disconnect there. I'm not ungrateful. They did give us money. It was very kind of them to give us money on record-breaking profit years. But I do think there's a disconnect there sometimes between when executives get so far in their career that their experience is so far from the day-to-day of what's actually happening, that them saying something like, you shouldn't complain and you shouldn't whine, is kind of just like a slap in the face. It's like, why are you laying us off from your vacation hotel in Hawaii? Like, it's giving no. Like,
if you're not encouraging discussion and discourse, then you're also going to turn around and ask, like, why are people quitting? Why do we have horrible reviews on Glassdoor on our website? Why is it really hard for us to hire people? It's like, well, it's because you didn't listen to them when they were here. And you didn't acknowledge the fact that maybe there was some things that you could do to improve. And I think, you know, something about kind of when you're putting in more than ever before, and you're really going above and beyond, and the bonus isn't equitable or the reward isn't equitable, that's where you can get that completely valid, frustrated reaction. Even if you can also say, it's better than nothing. It's still nice that this was here. It just wasn't the right way to do it. Or it could have been acknowledged a little bit differently. And there's also, I mean, there's something about HR that I always I'm a Harry Potter person. So, like, I always kind of compare it to, like, we're house elves. So it's like, you only see us if something's wrong. but like when things are good, you don't even know that we exist. So it's almost like if we're not talking about, if we're not sharing where we do struggle, even when we still do things really, really well, then our work isn't seen. And so therefore our rewards aren't equitable and they are disappointing. And I'll be honest, I don't always even know, like, what the best way to do that is, right? Like, maybe it's like communicating wins at the same rate that we communicate frustrations, or just being more open about how HR success is measured and what HR does. I was talking to someone who they're a player coach. So like they manage a team, but they also have individual contributor work. And they said that managing their team feels like it's a side hustle. And, we were talking about it in the context of performance management and like, how are you kind of managing the performance of your employees and giving them development resources and helping them to do their job? And they're like, well, managing my employees really feels like a side hustle because my goals are weighted based more on my individual contributor work than on how I show up as a manager and as a leader to my teams. And I thought that was so true. I was like, that is I've never heard it put like just that simply, but that's where like, and performance management is usually a huge initiative that HR does, right? So it's like a thing that's our whole purview or a huge part of what we do is seen as a side hustle to the people that are crucial to it being successful. And I don't know how to I have ideas of how we can make the people management piece of it less of a side hustle. I think it's rewarding and incentivizing managers showing up as managers and not just as individual contributors. But there was just this component where I'm just like, it's always going to be hard until the work that we do is seen, validated, and relevant and rewarding to employees and managers too. It's like it has to kind of come together.
Yeah. I'm dying at the side hustle comment. I was like, wow.
I was like, that's honest.
That's real.
Yeah.
I feel it sometimes. Wait, this is not to do anything with HR. What's your Harry Potter house? What house are you in?
I'm a Ravenclaw.
I feel like I could have guessed that. Do you want to guess my house?
I feel like you're a Hufflepuff.
I am.
I knew it.
Despite taking this quiz 1,000 times, first of all, I would just like to also publicly state I do not agree with a lot of the things that J.K. Rowling is doing in the public right now.
Agreed.
I will leave that behind, but I do love the story that she wrote, and I find it really hard to divorce her from the art, but I did love Harry Potter growing up, and it was a formidable part of my childhood.
Same.
And I am a Hufflepuff, loyal to the day I die. If my friend hates you, I hate you. If you hurt my friend, I will hate you forever. I'm working on that in therapy, actually. I don't think my therapist really loved me rolling in and being like, my Hufflepuff loyalty is really getting the these days.
It's like, let's explore why.
About some real things. Okay. I'm trying to find one last comment that we can read and maybe just like analyze it, talk a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's see what someone said.
There's a lot to pick from.
There's so many. Do you have one? Do you have one that stood out to you that you were like, oh, I want to read this and get Hebba's reaction?
I don't have any up right now. So like, I think there was one. Oh, there was one that he made a comment that was talking about how we have to be there and empathize for people in the same way that he was invalidating your perspective and what you were saying. I was like, do you have a mirror in your house, my friend? Because why don't you listen to yourself? But I don't remember what the exact quote was, though.
Yeah. It was that, like, I mean, I read you some, but like there was also like a lot of weird toxic positivity too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm telling you, like people have a really weird reaction when I tell them the newsletter is called I Hate It Here. And they're like, but that's so negative. Do you know at least once a month, I get an email from someone that's like, I love your newsletter, but I hate the name. You should call it something else. And I'm like, well, didn't know I was taking feedback on that. And I always reply, to be very clear. I always reply every time I like massage it a little bit, but I have a canned response sometimes too. I say, hey, let me explain to you why I called it I Hate It Here. Because I think it's a feeling that people really have, that people don't like work, either HR people or employees. And the problem is by failing to acknowledge that something is not right, we won't change anything. And if you read the newsletter and get to know me, you would find that I'm like the most optimistic person, honestly, sometimes delusionally optimistic, as I have revealed over the course of this podcast. I'm delusional about where HR can go, but that's really fueled by the optimism because I feel like we have so much untapped potential. And I'm looking forward to a reality in which in the next 10 years, like more former HR leaders go off and create businesses. They go off and they build software that we really need because you intimately understand the struggles I'm having as an HR leader, whereas a lot of people who make software don't. Mm-hmm. Nothing against them. Thank you for making software. Appreciate you. But I prefer when the person has actually done the job and has made the software. And I feel like people are really struggling online where they're like, everything feels like it's an either or. And I'm like, y'all, there's room for so many opinions.
Yeah.
We can all have opinions. And just because I say I hate something does not mean I'm a miserable, terrible person. It could just mean I hate it and I want to make it change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what fuels it.
And you know what? Hate can be a really good fuel in that context too, or frustration. It just becomes this thing that's just like, sometimes spite is another one. It's like, I'm going to do this thing that you tell me that I can't do just to show you that I can.
Yeah.
It's why I quit my HR job to start SkillCycle, because I was like, I didn't love the relationship between companies and employees. As an employee and as an HR person. And I was sort of, I just didn't love, I just thought that there was like, I thought there was so much more that we could do better together. And I really wanted to see something where people could actually get just feedback that they wanted or feedback that they needed from the people who they needed to hear it from, with action items to then go forth and develop different skills and learn different things. Who would have thought that'd be such a controversial thing, or that that'd be such a, something that, I think that it's kind of interesting because I've seen a lot of people going fractional. I've seen a lot of people quitting their HR jobs and going fractional or going into consulting. And that's that's their version of quitting and going out on their own. And so when I ask them how it is, or if I ask them why they do that, they're like, because I don't want to deal with these people anymore. I want to make money off of my skill set, but I don't want to deal with how I've been working with people to date in organizations. There's a different level of perception sometimes when you're coming in and you're able to sort of oversee things, knowing that at the end of the day, if this doesn't work out, or if this contract ends at a certain time, you can go find something else somewhere else, if that's the best sort of way that you're able to get business and things that you're able to do. My version of going fractional was to start SkillCycle, because I was like, I need to work with a lot of different HR people and be a better support system for them and build technology that they'll actually use. One of my biggest fears is being too foundery about what we're building. So it's why we build, we get feedback from our customers, we get feedback from the market, we iterate, we tweak, we go. Like, I never, ever want to put something out there where like your reaction is just like, I didn't ask for this. I've seen that before with something else.
Oh, I've seen that before. It's so much software. Yeah. Okay. I have one last comment to read you. I'm sorry. I have to do it.
I'm ready.
I don't know if I want to end on this note, but I'm going to read it because I just feel like I should. This article is infuriating. Create value, and if you think you are not treated well, call it out without hesitation. No function is perfect, including the business areas we enable. Imagine if HR walked away. Good luck. What?
I think that's my only response right now. Like, wait, what? I almost can't can't even tell what they're trying to say to an extent.
I was like, what, are you infuriated? Why are you infuriated? Yeah. Why are you infuriated? It's just interesting.
Yeah. And it's like, what was it? It was like, if you don't like it, add value. Wasn't that sort of the first part of the comment?
Or walk away. And I'm like, hey, a lot of people need employment to pay for their lives and can't walk away.
Wait, what? I had no idea.
I'm also sometimes worried that HR attracts a lot of people pleasers. So we're too afraid to say no to people. And I'm working through my own notions, because I thought I was not a people pleaser. And then the other day I was like, oh my God, wait a minute. That's a people pleasing tendency. Why am I doing it?
Mm-hmm. I was literally going to say recovering people pleaser over here. So yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah, same.
We're working on it.
It's always work.
I know. God, there's so much to unpack here. First of all, one, I just want to say thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
But also being just like a sounding board for me as I was navigating the last 24 to 48 hours and people having some very harsh opinions. I understand the article and the opinions were not directed straight at me, but it felt kind of lonely for a few hours where people were just not accepting of the fact that we as HR are allowed to be miserable when we are. And sometimes that anger can, again, fuel, coming back to that same theme of that anger can fuel a lot of things. And I would have felt incredibly lonely, honestly, without having you just in my texts and being so supportive and sharing your thoughts. So I just want to say thank you.
I'm glad. No, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's I saw that and I was just like, this is someone who I know might need to hear something from someone. And I figured if you're fielding other responses or other things or other people, then I'm like, then that's great. But it's really hard to be the face of something too, because your face is the first thing on that article. And so
I wish I had known.
Yeah. That has its own weight, right?
It is I will just say and I'm a content creator. I'm used to it, right? My content's out there, but I think it was very jarring to wake up and see a lot of commentary about it all over Twitter. And then to see my face and to see like very popular people with massive followings posting an article with my face, but then not spending the time to tag the 3 HR people that were quoted in it was also like somewhat traumatizing. I'm like, wait a minute, you're going to use my face, talk about something negative. And then, I mean, I understand I gave my rights to that picture. I'm not complaining, but I think it was just a learning moment for me personally as I'm like growing and doing this content thing.
I think it's like, it's also important. This is where I always say like community is a thing. It's just like, we have community within each other. Like you have your community, your safe space community, I mean, like other communities too. And just like, I think that is the thing that can make like our HR tendencies be really strong. It's like, we know when someone needs to show up for someone. And, you know, I'm glad that I could be here now. And I hope like one day if it's my face that you'll be like, yo, let me give you some advice here.
And it's your face when everyone's really mad about the word miserable. Like, I just thought it was funny because I said it to my family and my family was like, LOL, like your face underneath the word miserable. And I'm like, oh my God, why?
Well, people take things so personally though. And then they love to have a person to sort of channel all of that at. And like, it's unfortunate that it was you. It would have been unfortunate no matter who it was, right? Like, I don't wish that it was anybody else either, but I know you, so I'm sorry that it was you.
I mean, that comes with the territory. And I'm in conversations with Kyle and Vanessa, the other 2 HR people in the article, to actually join me for a podcast episode where we're going to talk about our experiences in being interviewed and what it meant for us and the untold story that we wish was going to be told.
Ooh,
so that'll come, that episode will come later. I'm very excited about it. So that's happening. And I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's PR, like it's good exposure to get more people to the I Hated Here brand and they can join us in safe space. The community, actually I have a discount code. If you use the word HR love, you actually get a discount code to join us, but that's safe space. Rebecca, what's another one of your favorite communities? I know you have one, so I'm waiting to hear.
Oh my God. Troop HR is another one of my favorites. This is just like, I think that the thing that's so nice about safe space and Troop HR especially is that there are real conversations happening in there. And you know, it's always funny because I'm always there as a vendor, right? But I try not to be a vendor. But even in those contents and in those sort of conversations, there's just a lot of really cool problems to talk about and things to do. And like, I think my favorite thing is when you see someone come to one of those communities, whether it's Troop HR, whether it's Safe Space, and they come with like a vent or a rant. Mm-hmm. And then within like an hour, all of a sudden they have a whole problem. They have a whole problem solving plan. They have a whole solution. Like, I think it's just so absolutely powerful. But yeah, Troop HR is my other one.
I love it. Communities are so important. You just got to find your people. I'm all about finding your people. Anyways, Thank you again for joining me today. I'm so grateful for you. And everyone, please check out Rebecca and SkillCycle.
Thank you, Hebba. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.